Hello, everybody. Thank you. That was my biography. I think you already may have read it, and you read it so beautifully. So I always wonder, is that me? You know, have that feeling when you... Anyway, I lead a double life because I'm also a mother of 3 children, and of course, our professional lives and our family lives are really, really important. And in this day and age, you know, women do both. Right. So it's really an honor for me to be in this position, to be here with the Symphony of Arkansas. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. I'm enjoying very much visiting here. And, you know, thank you for having me speak here. And I'd love this to be a dialogue, both with Christina and with you. So if at some point something is interesting and that you want to go further into it and we seem to be going in a different direction, please put up your hand and let us know and ask your question then. Don't feel you have to wait to the end. We will do a Q&A at the end, so you have time to dream up all sorts of tricky questions. But if something you want to get into at the time, please do. So, with that, shall we launch in?
I never know how to turn these on. Is this on? Oh, it is on. I managed to do it. Okay. Sarah, I thought we could just get started. It's not on? Closer? Oh, okay. See, maybe I'm just afraid of microphones. All right. Sarah, I thought we could get started by talking a little bit about your background and how you got into conducting. I mean, I know as a woman leader, I didn't necessarily see that many women leading orchestras, and I assume you probably didn't see that many women conductors. So tell us how you got interested in conducting and how you got started.
Right. Well, you know, there's 2 aspects of this that have come up. One, that I'm a woman. I have nothing to do with that, by the way. But yes, being a conductor was my choice. But I launched into it at a time where I'd seen very few conductors. I was already interested in the art form of music, of scores, of instrumentation, of basically, you know, you turn on an incredible piece of music and it does incredible things to you as you listen to it. It pulls all sorts of strings. And that was really fascinating to me. We didn't have even a record player. It was a record player in my days at home. So my access to music was through the schools. Though if you'd read a little bit more, you would also know that my father was a conductor, but I didn't actually live with him. And I was intrigued to learn as many different instruments as I could. So as my mother would let me, and she would make me practice as well. So, you know, so the deal was if you pick up another instrument, you have to practice it. And so there was times in my teenage years where I really came home and all I did was practice, eat a little, you know, and go to bed. So it was from a very, very early age that I was inspired by when we did have a record player when I was very young in Australia, and was amazed to see that the sound that was coming out of the speaker was, when I looked at a picture book, pieces of wood, metal, you know, how on earth do people scraping and hitting and pushing things create this extraordinary, powerful Tchaikovsky or whatever, Brahms or whatever music it was, or things that make you dance. And I just couldn't quite believe this. It's like a miracle, and trying to figure out how that works, how it takes place. So this quest for learning instruments was a thirst, and I was about 16 in our school. Orchestra got to go to London and see a concert, and I was able to watch a couple of conductors, and one of them was a female conductor. And so, you know, I didn't think twice about, you know, whether it was a profession for women or not. And so I saw a man conducting, I saw a woman conducting. I saw my father when I went to visit him in Germany, who was also had been studying conducting, moved into that very late in his career, started when he was in 30 after doing neurophysiological studies and science, switched back to music. So really, it was about then that I thought, this is just fascinating. And, there's so many things to think about as a conductor. What you're doing is connecting music, connecting people, performing people with audiences, and it just really started to blow my mind. And then, of course, the study of each and every composer is like a study of one human being, one person, to get to know Tchaikovsky through his music, and so many different composers. So it was hard not to get pulled really deeply into it. Once I started to study it, that was really my path, and I thought, I'll keep doing this until somebody tells me I shouldn't be doing it. And it didn't happen, so yet.
So where did you study? Once you found your thirst and never wanted to stop, where did you go to study?
So the first thing I tried to do was ignore my father's advice. He suggested, you're a great violinist, you should go study violin. And actually it was my computer science teacher that I listened to, who said, well, logically speaking, if you want to be a conductor, the place to go and conduct is where they don't train musicians with the highest level of conductors, because you won't get on the podium. Go to somewhere like where you can really engage with people who love music, who don't necessarily study it. So Oxbridge is a great place for you to look at. There are hundreds of orchestras there. You can put your own band together. And basically, I took that advice and I started studying for the exams to get into Oxbridge. And I was able to go to Oxford, start my own choir, start my own orchestra within a year, run the university orchestra, be the concertmaster of the other university orchestra, and kind of just get really involved. From there, I went to Guildhall School of Music, which is where my father and my grandfather actually studied as well. And all the while, I was looking for who were the great conducting teachers, because, as I explained, I wasn't really getting lessons as such, and I was able to take summer study with somebody called George Hurst at Camford, which was a wonderful summer school in conducting. But the legacy of Otto Werner Müller in the United States was very profound, and he was one of the greatest living teachers, former music director of the New York Philharmonic, for example. Alan Gilbert was one of his students, and he's created many wonderful. He picks good students. He always would say, if you pick a weed, it's going to be a weed. But you pick a nice bud, and you water it, and you give it everything it needs. So I was able to study with 4 years in the U.S. From 96 to 2000, both at the Curtis and the Juilliard School of Music for 4 years. That was a very intense time. Yeah.
Now, I know one of your jobs has been assistant conductor of Cincinnati Symphony. When I think of assistant conductor, the job is a lot harder than it sounds. Would you describe a little bit about what that would be like?
So to get to the point of assistant, you have to prove that you can get up and conduct those musicians. So the audition process, you would be qualified to be able to stand in front of Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. So it's an incredible honor. But then you spend most of the time not conducting the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. You sit in the hall, and every conductor that comes in, you learn their program just in case they would get sick or... So I found that Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra is a very busy orchestra. Okay, they have a full classical series, and they have a pop series, and they have Cincinnati May Festival, and they had a summer series at Riverbend. And basically, 6 days a week, they're either rehearsing or doing concerts. And their day off, I get to go and train my orchestra, which was the Youth Symphony, was a marvelous symphony, be music director of the Youth Symphony of Cincinnati. So mine was a 7-day a week, and having to be prepared for any one of those programs, which meant that I had probably more programs to learn than any one of those conductors in a way, because the orchestra plays, I had to learn as much as the orchestra itself did. And some of that repertoire I had learned, some of it was new, and so I had a lot to learn and keep up with. And of course, conductors never get sick. So, except for you told me a good story where...
Yes, well, I was telling her a story. I worked for the Cleveland Orchestra, and the Cleveland Orchestra's music director is Franz Felser-Most, and he lives in Austria most of the time. And so Franz got a sinus infection, and he wasn't allowed to fly. And so the assistant conductor got to conduct the Cleveland Orchestra on their Masterwork series, and he got all these rave reviews. The Beethoven 7 was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. But of course, everybody was like, oh, can he do it? Can he possibly do it? And then he got these great reviews, and then his career kind of took off after that. So it's helpful if they get sick.
Yeah, we're way too healthy these days. I mean, it used to be that the conductor was the concert master, right? If we look back, they played and they get up and they tap their stick and everybody, follow and then go back to so leadership from the keyboard and from the instrument itself. And the conductor, since the 19th century, really developed into something else, both often a composer and a conductor at the same time, to be able to conduct one's own works, Mahler, even at Elgar. And now it's a little bit different. I'd often dream about having time to compose, but I don't see where the extra time is going to come at the moment with the scores that I have to learn, and then also having a family. So it was a 2-year really eye-opener, and in a way it capped off my 12 years of study to become a conductor, from when I started at Oxford to when I left Cincinnati. And I was really, really thirsty to get on with something. And actually, I wasn't sure after all this whether I was making enough difference sitting in the hall and being ready. I felt like I had more purpose, and actually I was thinking about becoming a music therapist, because I knew that music had really, really important benefits, health benefits, and made a difference for those people who, either struggled with language or Alzheimer's or whatever it was. That my aunt in Cyprus was a music therapist, and I was thinking about doing that when the phone rang. And somebody said, well, the music director's leaving in El Paso. Would you be interested in that job? And at the same time, I got an audition with the Spartanburg Philharmonic. So I left Cincinnati, went back to England, and applied for jobs, which is a hard thing to do, because, every job, there's 200-300 applications for a conducting position. So I took those auditions, and somehow things worked out in 2005, and I won both jobs at the same time, and moved back to the US and started my career in fullness. I'd already been doing a guest conducting and working with Tan Dun, a Chinese composer, around the world, training choirs for him, because he was too busy to be at the rehearsals. So it was, it sort of sometimes feels like a public service role, especially when I do more things that are way different than conducting as part of the job of being a conductor.
Right. I was going to ask, well, and quickly with Tan Dun. So Tan Dun wrote the score to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I'm sure he's written others, so I bet that was a huge job to help him and get things ready. But being a music director is... Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Most people think of music directors and they think it's the person that stands on the podium and uses a stick, but there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, I think that the music director has the artistic vision and plans to be able to mold the artistic direction of an orchestra. And that can be anything from dreaming up incredibly inspiring projects, to commissioning new music, to figuring out what is going to help synergize in the community to be able to give more accessibility to music, to being able to be an advocate for the arts, not just music, to being present at as many places as one can speak to the benefits of the arts and music. So, an advocate, a fundraiser, very important. I mean, not necessarily asking for money, but showing why there is a great value in the study of music, and talking to folks who haven't necessarily been or felt or got the bug. I'm guessing most of you here that you got the music bug at some point, and so one feels often like you're preaching to the choir about music, right? But it's reminding us that we have to spread the word again, and be advocates for it. And I help shape grant applications with artistic content. For example, 2 NEA grants that we received. I've also been on the other side of the NEA. The panelists will get to discuss and show the merit and excellence in the projects, and that's a very interesting side. So that's, again, is part of the role of understanding what is going to be successful and compelling, not just to the NEA, but also to one's own community in the field of creating projects that are meaningful and resonate with their own community. So part of being a music director really means knowing that community, knowing important information about who makes up that community, which community we're tapping into or we're not, which schools are in need, how we can raise money for those who don't have the programs that are extremely important to have music in the schools. And the problem often is that music, as I was telling the students, doesn't have big dollar signs at the end. In fact, we have to spend a lot of money to make music, classical music, perpetuate in the future. Well, why is it worth it? Why is this more important than folks who are homeless or, it's a big subject. But I just pulled up one of my favorite things is to research is music in the brain, and I just pulled up this thing. There's one of the most recent neuroscientist researchers that they use these machines called fMRIs and PETs, the functional magnetic resonance machine, and the positron emission tomography that shows the mapping of the brain when you do certain things. So, if you give somebody a mathematical thing, you can actually see the brain light up when, and then reading a sentence, you can see another part of the brain light up. The extraordinary thing that they have found is that when they listen to music, both sides of the brain are lighting up, both the internal emotional side and the exterior right and left brain making connections. And then way beyond that is when somebody starts to play an instrument. And they show that all of the paths connecting back and forth are going extremely fast back and forth. The whole thing is a light. There are zigzags and pathways and neural kind of connections that are just mind-boggling, not happening in any other thing like sport or any. They haven't. They're looking for it. Isn't that showing that this is the brain on steroids in a different way? Now, if we were all given this super nutrient, would we not be a different world? Could we not do so much more? So they show that through this system, it's not just a powerful emotion system. It is activating memory, mode of control, sequencing, attention, spatial processing, abstract thinking, imagery, and it's the most powerful way that we have of activating the most part of the brain. And to me, this research has got to get out there and hit big time. But again, it doesn't have big dollar signs at the end of it. So how do we show we know many things about how it helps, music therapy helps, and various things like that. But we've got to invest in this and use scientific tools to show the before and after effects. So, I'm very passionate about that kind of thing. And I think when it excites people and when we make other connections to other parts of the community, in arts and in dance and in ballet and in sports and in physical therapy, and that there is no limit to the way that music can make connections. And so we've got to use it to make the connection. Let's not just isolate it. Let's study it. Let's show why understanding Beethoven is not just a feast for the brain, but actually, good for our future developers of understanding, science of understanding, reasoning, understanding communications, and having a back and forth dialogue. Because I think dialogue is really important. And, the more that students and the world gets attached to technology, and technology talks back to us, how do we make music part of that dialogue and retain it? And then unfortunately, because it doesn't get supported with endless dollar signs, we have to be very, very creative and highly believing in this art form. And that's hard, isn't it? Yep.
Yes. That was a lot. Yes. Yes to everything you just said. One of the things that I love working with living composers. For me, getting to work with a living composer does allow for that dialogue in a community, and I often try to look for composers that I think have a fit to the place that I'm living in. Now, you've been a great advocate of commissioning works and working with living composers, and so one of my questions is, why do you believe in so much in living composers? And then my second one, my follow-up question is, this weekend we're performing a work by Joan Tower, and I've actually gotten to work with Joan Tower, and this particular piece is called Made in America, and it was interesting. One of my previous jobs was with the Mobile Symphony, and I played in the orchestra there, so I've actually gotten to play Made in America in that original commission. There were 50 states that commissioned this piece from her. But so if you could talk a little bit about your work with living composers, and then talk a little bit about this weekend's performance and what kind of dialogue we might have from the music this weekend, or why you put these particular pieces together so we can connect it together.
Right. So living composers, of course, I think if they don't get opportunities, we're not going to be producing the next geniuses of the next generation. I think it's really important to find the excitement in playing something that has been written just specially for you in this time, in this place that reflects upon our society and that person's unique relationship with it. And these days, it's a very different thing to be a living composer than it was in Mozart's day or in Beethoven's day. The pressures of having to verify one's art remain consistent, that the music has to speak for itself, but we have so many more competitors of types of music, it makes it even harder for those composers to have a chance to have a voice and to make statements. And I think there's no reason why there aren't even greater geniuses than Mozart and Beethoven out there today. And we have to support them, we have to find them. And I think it's always very interesting when we have a project it's got a very specific goal in mind. So just a small example of one of the projects of the commissions that I did was a fire mountain for Tacoma. And Fire Mountain, and actually it's not just for Tacoma, it's for anywhere that is on this planet, because it's about environmental changes, it's about global warming, it's about what happens when we stoke the fire, and how we need to really be sensitive and aware of how much water we use, and all of these things that are part of what education is really telling the next generation in a big way. So this piece was commissioned to be a collaborative project with an art film that shows the beauty and landscape of Mount Rainier in the national parks, Olympic National Park, and it was celebrating the 100th anniversary of the National Parks Association that year. It was also celebrating the youth of Tacoma and the musicians, giving them opportunities to go up to the mountain. Kids were given buses. Most of them had never been up there. They were able to have access to climate scientists, to park rangers, to ask questions, to have instruments, to even compose out there whilst there was snowshoeing on the mountain. We have some really interesting footage of that happening. And basically open their minds to all the possibilities and the connections that they would see then at the end of it, how a piece of music had been inspired and created based on all of these different things that were happening, both in science, both in the weather, and with glacial melting and the changes over the years. And this piece came out of it that was just extraordinary, very, very beautiful, and very, very personal and touching to the community of Tacoma and the South Sound region. So much success that we had to do it again, and we hope to be able to record it as well and make it accessible. So that was just one example, and that was funded by the NEA. That was a very wonderful project. This weekend we have a really important piece of music by a female composer, and I think the more I do female composers, the more I'm looking back over the 200-300 years of how women were not really approved to be out there on the stage, were not approved to be composers. And then, researching things like Bach and Mozart and who helped him in some of those pieces. And there's quite often a woman on the scene who's just as an accomplished musician. Fanny Mendelssohn, for example, Clara Schumann, and Louise Ferenc, and there are all these kind of heroic women composers that we don't know about because it wasn't appropriate in that day and age for them to be promoting anything other than, their beauty and their skills as a great craft maker or helper, or, mother, or a society person throwing parties, So
It'll look nice.
These days, you look at somebody like Joan Tower, and she was one of the first women composers of America that we really recognize the name of. I mean, Amy Beach may be another one, but Joan Tower's got an incredible output of orchestral music that has been celebrated. And she wrote this piece, Made in America, and it features the theme of America the Beautiful, which is such a beautiful, it should be the national anthem, really, but
it'd be a lot easier to sing.
Opinion.
Yes.
But it's very chromatic and dark and shows how the struggles of keeping America beautiful are what she's writing about. And there's almost like this big question mark at the end of the piece. And, you can see how that piece can be relevant then, it can be relevant now, it's going to be relevant for the next generation and the next generation. And it also is extremely beautiful. So she's writing about her homeland, and the other composers that are on the program are also really writing about their homeland and the people that are most important to them.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about the Smetana, the Moldau, or you're running by she was showing me these pictures of running on our Little Rock River, on our Arkansas River, and how that was connected to this music that we're going to hear this weekend. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the Smetana, we perform 2 movements from a work that he wrote called Mavlast, My Fatherland. And so the theme of celebrating one's land and the beauty of one's land is not just in the Made in America by Joan Tower. It's very much in this tone poem, which is a series of 6, but we only play 2. The others are also extremely good. The Moldau is the river there, and that's a beautiful work. It describes how 2 small brooks become one gushing river, and the music, swells up and wells up as the waves and current floods into this great river. And walking over here and seeing that spectacular river you have here, it really resonated with the music that we're playing with the Moldau. And the beauty of that river, stunning. And then it passes the castle of Vyšehrad, and that theme from Vyšehrad is appearing in the Moldau. So this amazingly old, historic, and I was thinking of the rock, being that great castle. And then the next movement that we play is Sharka, and it's about women warrior who... It's not a pretty story, but I'll tell you anyway. With her desire to have vengeance on a broken heart, on the man, or symbolism for men that broke her heart, she allows herself to get tied up to a tree, and in doing so, this is by maybe the natives tie her up, and she's off. Maybe I don't know what's going to happen to her later, but fortunately for her, unfortunately for them, the knights come along, the prince and his troop, and the music becomes very elegant, at that moment, and you can sort of hear the galloping of the little horses, and he spots her, and he has to save her, and he falls desperately in love with Sharka, which was the plan all along. And she gets rescued, but in the meantime, of course, they have to have a little party, and there's a polka, and they drink a lot, and before they untie her, they sort of collapse in a heap, drunk. And she doesn't quite get saved, but she's somehow able to produce a fantastic horn call, which David is going to play, David Renfro, and her maiden warriors hear her, and they come rushing to save her. They let her escape, and they slay all of the men. That's the end of that. But anyway, I just have to tell you, because you're a runner, I was running along back across the bridge, and I was listening to this new version I never had heard of the Sharka. Running, and it's the end of the run. You shouldn't really rush it, because you have to save yourself for the podium. Right. But the music was just carrying me forth. It was just that powerful rush of the women warriors into the end of that piece. This so exhilarating and so much energy. It was hard to stop myself. I had to. Fortunately, the piece ended in time for me to not trip or fall. And then on the second half, you want to hear about the second half too, or shall I take a breath?
Well, I was going to ask, so thankfully we don't end with a slaying. There is a second half to the show, and the second half is the Elgar Enigma variations, and that happens to be one of my favorite pieces of music of all time. And one of the movements in there is Nimrod, and Nimrod is definitely in my top 2 pieces that I just love to listen to, and it's one of the movements that I listen to when I'm feeling most anxious or most distressed, and it always has inspired me, and I'd love for you to tell. I learned more about it last night when I had dinner with you, and I'd love for you to share more what they're going to hear in the second half.
So Nimrod is one of the variations from the very famous one from the Enigma. And when Elgar was writing the Enigma variations, he was also going through a great period of self-doubt. You know, he was in a circle of friends that were mostly amateur musicians, and, you know, his wife was very supportive of him as a composer and really, really believed that supporting him as an artist was way more important than sort of keeping her place in society. You know, she'd married, you know, it was very much, in those days, you had to kind of stick in your groups. But she'd married a different level because she loved Elgar and she believed in his music and his artistry. But he often felt that other people didn't really get it, or he wasn't really that good, or, you know. And he writes this about all of his friends. And when he's writing, before he started, the idea came. He came back from some class and he'd been teaching violin students all day, for better or for worse, and came away with this kind of little thing, and, you know, his wife goes to him and says, you know, you need a cigar, dear. You know, is everything okay? And, you know, what is it that he's just playing a few notes at the piano, and he says, it's nothing, it's just nothing, you know. But maybe something can be made of it. Anyway, so he's quite desperate, and, you know, he starts to joke around and plays a form of it in the style of one of his friends, and, you know, so they have a little joke, and out of it comes all of these variations of different characters and people he knew, all of them very passionate about music. Some of them, there's only one of them was a professional musician, but the rest he mostly played in quartets. They would gather. And one of the other people he wrote about was his publisher, Jaeger. And he wrote to him during this time when he was in the midst of composing Enigma, and he sort of said that, you know, he was done, pretty much going to give up. And, you know, as with many, many composers, thinks that they're not able to make it. In this profession, and Jaeger writes this scowling letter back to him, sort of throwing insults and saying, "How dare you? You know, just imagine how Beethoven felt. You know, he was losing his hearing, and, you know, I must come down and see you immediately." And he goes to visit Elgar, and they have a long walk, and Jaeger sings to him the second movement of Beethoven's Pathetique, and from there, this Pathetique is apparent in the music of Enigma variations. And the most beautiful movement, Nimrod, he gave to Jaeger. He named it Nimrod because of Jaeger. And it was really about Elgar finding his way out of this deep, dark place where he was in self-doubt, and really tributing it to his friendship and the love and belief of his publisher, who really, really felt that he must continue. And that piece really launched Elgar on the scene as the greatest living English composer to date, the greatest orchestral composer ever. And, you know, there are some 65 recordings out there. I mean, this piece has been endlessly discussed. What on earth is the Enigma? And who knows if there really is an actual Enigma, or whether it was just nothing.
Just an Enigma, right?
You know, because shortly before it was performed, Elgar said there is an Enigma within this, and you can find it. It's like the character who appears, but you can't see him. It's like the film director who puts himself in the movie, but you can't actually spot them unless you're really, really looking. So 100 years plus later, nobody has ever figured out what the Enigma is. So I think it's for everybody to discover. I also feel that there's definitely Beethoven in there. He said this is a very famous group of notes that basically is within this piece, and everybody wrote in what they thought the notes were, and he said, no, nothing like that at all. So I wonder if it was a guessing game and a smart thing of Elgar to do, to have people curious and investigating his music forever.
No, we've been talking a while. Do we have questions?
Wait, let me get a mic to you.
Yes, you mentioned the balance of family life and music. Could you elaborate on that? What was it like, early stages, middle stages, late stages of just balancing a career of travel and family?
So my children are 8 and 10 now. So I think middle, early. I don't know how long they're going to live. Maybe it's early. One never gives up being a parent. and it was a very unique challenge for me and for us because I wanted to be with my children as much as possible. And so, as one family member described, I drag them after me so that I can have my career. So I don't think one would say that of a man, right? But anyway, the kids have had the most amazing opportunities to travel, to be looking at things from many different perspectives. I think it's been a gift for them. It's given them a chance to think that there is no such way that one must do things, and that you must find your own path. And I think that's where the musical creativity has allowed me to have faith and hope and communications with people to say, please, my children will be as really good students, they'll be the best they can, and they won't disrupt the class. Could they come in for 2 weeks, please? And, to sort of be advocate and have people understand. So it's been very, very complicated. And the planning side of it has been a major part of my life the last 10 years, and my husband's too, who has an independent career also in music. And so from week to week, month to month, it has looked totally different until a year ago, where we said, okay, this is going to be their home, and they're going to quit tri-schooling throughout the year. But everything is possible. It's just finding the right way. And I think it's not necessarily about not taking no for an answer, but trying to show really good reasons why this is important. So it has been challenging, but a really good challenge.
Let me get a mic.
They do play instruments because I believe truly in the value of music, as you've heard. As early as I could get them into an instrument, I have. So I have a ukulele player who plays Bach sonatas, and I have a pianist who plays everything from Mozart, Scarlatti, Haydn, and a violinist. And they all sing. They all love to sing. And I'm not insisting on it as a career, because I don't think it needs to be for the musical training to be really paramount to their education. Who knows where it'll take them, and certainly I don't expect them or ask of them to be professional musicians.
I didn't quite catch where your home is now. Which country are you living in? And
I'm living in the United States, and my home...
In where?
In the United States of America.
Oh, right.
And my home is in Tacoma right now.
Oh, right.
But I also have a home in Connecticut, because my husband is still teaching in Connecticut 2 days a week at Yale.
Oh.
So we still have a very complicated travel schedule.
Yes.
And life. I was in Sweden 3 weeks out of 4 last month. And I'm here now, and he's there. And when I go back, he'll go and teach, and then we'll get together for a wonderful Thanksgiving and be thankful for being together. That's a nice thing.
Good. Will you all play music together?
We have. We do it occasionally. It's a very time-consuming thing to coordinate and orchestrate a ukulele, a piano, a violin, a trombone. But we have done it, and we're going to do more of it. Again, it's time. It's the amount of time that we have. So yeah.
Last one.
You said that you learned several instruments when you were young. What instruments do you play?
I did play to a fairly high level piano, violin, and French horn, and I studied also viola. I studied for a semester saxophone. That was not good. I studied singing, and I sang quite a lot. So I'd say 4 primarily. And I can pick up a few other instruments and make them work. And I think that's a really important part of being a conductor. The other part I didn't talk about is you really have to understand the musicians and their instruments and how they make music and how their line works together with that. So playing as many instruments as possible, I think is very helpful. And playing in an orchestra. As I grew up, I played in the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain and the Chamber Orchestra, and I played various different instruments in different orchestras. I even played timpani once in an orchestra at college. So that perspective, I can't tell you, who's more powerful, as the timpanist or the conductor? You know? I really enjoyed that.
Well, thank you all. Christina, Sarah, thank you so much for that. And please go see them this weekend. And we'll see you at the next one. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.